So I'm up at Cameron Pass right now at Tree Line so that we can talk about both spruce fir forest and the Alpine. So right now I'm going to talk about the Alpine, but we can kind of see the transition behind me here. Over here we've got spruce fir forest that you can kind of slowly tapers into the Alpine environment. So we'll focus on the Alpine right now, and then I'll go down slope and record a little bit about spruce fir. So in the US, we have about 3.6 million hectares of alpine environment, but approximately 3 million of those occur in Colorado and Wyoming. So, depending on where you end up for your careers, you could end up managing a decent amount of alpine environment. Now this environment is obviously fairly stressful for plants as it is for humans to be up here. A lot of the season we've got high winds, which are starting to pick up right now. That not only the wind speeds themselves, but the particulates that they blow around can be stressful for plants. We have really cold temperatures, high UV radiation that not only affects our skin and us, but it also affects the plants. And then, it's getting close to June, and we still have snow up here, so it really affects the growing season length. So plants up here are exposed to really short growing season. So despite this kind of short growing season and these harsh conditions, there is a decent amount of plant biodiversity in the Alpine. There's about 300 species of plants that occur in this region. So it's not devoid of plant life by any means. The plants that do grow up here, though, tend to be of the short-statured variety. So they're going to be really small plants. So that's why right now, when we look behind me, we see mostly snow and no plants in the Alpine. That's because they're all below the snowpack right now. The reason that short plants grow best in the Alpine is that they grow in the surface boundary layer. And so in that boundary layer right next to the surface of the ground, the wind speeds are reduced greatly, and that boundary layer also traps heat and water. And so the plants growing in that boundary layer stay warmer, and then they can grow better in those conditions. Whereas trees disrupt that boundary layer. And so when trees start to grow higher in elevation, they disrupt that boundary layer, it gets colder, and then those plants can't survive. So the plants we typically find in the Alpine, again, are going to be short-statured plants. They're also typically perennial plants because they store a lot of carbohydrates and nutrients below ground, so they can reuse that from year to year. They also have a high abundance of compounds that help them deal with the high UV light. A lot of the plants have lots of hairs on their leaves, which also creates a larger boundary layer, keeps them a little bit warmer, and helps them conserve water as well. And then those are the main adaptations of the plants. We have a range of communities within the Alpine. The area isn't dominated all by the same species. It goes from higher up on the ridges where there's less snowpack. We tend to get these communities dominated by sedge species. So you're learning one sedge species in this session. So that's not the one that dominates the Alpine, but it's related to that one. And then if you go further down off of the slopes, we get different plant communities occurring. And really what controls what plant communities occur is the snowpack. So the more snowpack, the more water there is, but the shorter the growing season. And so between those two factors, it really affects what species are going to be most common in those areas. Okay, thinking more about herbivory and range management in the Alpine, the carrying capacity is relatively low. In the best places, it's about 5 to 10 acres per animal unit month. And in the poorer places where there's little forage production, it's more like 20 acres per animal unit month. Now those are, animal unit months, which is based on cattle. At high elevation like this, cattle don't really deal with these conditions very well. They're prone to what's called brisket disease, which is a heart failure. And so often at high elevation, domesticated cattle aren't grazed. So it's more sheep. So from a sheep's perspective, the grazing is a little bit better, where in the good places you might have 1 to 2 acre per animal unit month. So that's not too bad, and in certain cases that might be a worthwhile use of the alpine environment. However, the limitations are higher in alpine environments. You can only utilize about 25% of the forage, because a lot like riparian systems, these alpine systems are really sensitive to overgrazing, and so we want to be really careful that we don't graze them too heavily. In large part because of that, from a range perspective and range management perspective, really the activities are focused around restoration rather than actual grazing of animals. However, there are places where grazing is still utilized in the alpine environment.